Hello, welcome back to Kaylee Daily. Today's question is, what is a hybrid approach to childbirth education?
This is Kaylee Daily, the bi-weekly podcast about all things doula tips and tips, where we answer one question about pregnancy, labor, postpartum, or lactation in order to have your journey in this parenting world be just a little bit more informed and filled with consent.
Hello and welcome back. This is our next episode in the Childbirth Ed series. Today's question is, what is a hybrid approach? Now, I'm going to talk about what I even mean by that and how there's a couple different types of hybrid approaches. Also, I'm Kaylee Harrod. I didn't even start with that. Where am I going here? So I'm Kaylee Harrod. I am the owner of Harrod Doula Services, the author and host of this beautiful podcast. And if you're new to us, if you're just joining us for the first time, we're in the middle of a series all about different types of childbirth education and questions about childbirth education. This podcast is a podcast where we answer one question. And so I really love to have your questions on my list of things to answer. And I bring in other friends and guests and whatnot in some of them. And I would love to hear from you and hear the questions that you have. We have other series coming. So we're going to talk about doulas. We're going to talk about birthing locations. We're going to, dive into lots of other topics this season. But please do send me your questions over on Instagram in a message, DM me over there. And then I would love to add them to my list for this season. So for today, we're talking about hybrid models. Now, there's a few different versions that I'm aware of. It's also possible that there are versions I'm not aware of. The first is virtual and in-person. So one of the hybrids that I personally teach in the DC area is a hybrid where part of the class is taught virtually, part of the class is done in person. So it's a 2 separate days class. The first class, we dive into the logistics of labor and talk through what all is happening in the uterus and the stages and all of that. It's very similar in terms of content to a Childbirth Express class. I use the same kind of material, right? But then the second class is slightly longer than the first one. So I break them up a little differently. And that second class is in person so that we can do some of the comfort measures together. And I can actually help you kind of troubleshoot with hands-on stuff. So in terms of comfort measures, I'm not teaching things that I don't talk about and teach in the virtual class. It's more that you get a little bit more help with how to actually apply that stuff, right? So that's one type of hybrid education where you're doing part of it together and part of it virtual, but all of it's taught live, right? So the first class, we're live together. You can ask questions and interact. And then the second class, same group of people, we're also live together, but we're in person, okay? The other type of hybrid class that I'm aware of is something like a self-paced class that also includes some live online teaching. And what that typically looks like is you have modules or videos that you watch beforehand. And then on a specific day and time, you come to a session where you either ask questions about those modules or you dive into them a little bit more. You troubleshoot some, maybe you learn some extra things there. So it's a mixture of both hybrid and live or taught virtually, but in real time, right? That's a really good option for folks who are not able to commit a bunch of hours at once and just want 1 hour live, but the bulk of the messaging, bulk of the education virtually and self-paced, right? It's kind of a perfect meld between having completely virtual self-paced and having some live where you're interacting with other pregnant folks and your teacher, right? Now in the DC area, there's lots of variations of this. But it's something that you could look for in your area. Some people call it hybrid. Some people call it, self-paced, and, some people would call it a weekend childbirth class, but with an in-person component. It is something that has been around pre-pandemic, but has become more prevalent since the pandemic started. And so it's easier to find something like that now that the pandemic has been going. So if you stumble across a class like that, or that's what you're looking for, then those are kind of the key search terms that you would want to search. Now, the main benefit, I think, is that, I already talked a little bit about the main benefit of the virtual and also some self-paced kind of hybrid. The main benefit to the one that I teach, I think, is that you get some hands-on troubleshooting. And I think teaching those skills virtually is really valuable, right? But sometimes if you're a learner that kind of needs to like see and feel and practice it in real time, it can be very helpful to have that like troubleshooting in person, right? And often I find that like a client will say like, I really want that in-person time if I'm concerned that like, I'm not actually doing this right. And my partner doesn't know what it should feel like. So they can't really tell me that I'm doing it wrong, right? And so that's a time when it's a good idea to have a little bit of it in person. It's also a good fit for people who want some in-person education, but they're kind of nervous to be with people a bunch because of COVID. And so you don't have to have that like 8-hour chunk of time with other people, but you can have some in-person instruction. And so that's also a time when I think that it's a good fit for folks. In terms of what it covers, I can't speak to every type of hybrid class, but the kind of hybrid class I teach really is very similar to Childbirth Express, Birthing 101, something like that, like basics, right? The childbirth basics. Not that it's not still like very comprehensive, but it's not like something where we're learning dozens of comfort measures, right? So that's just in terms of context helpful maybe. So that's all for today. This is a very short and sweet one, but next week look for those interviews that I have coming, which I'm very stoked about, where we'll dive into hypnosis and birth. We'll talk about the Bradley method. And so you can hear kind of from other instructors that are trained in things that I am not trained in, what their approach is and what their classes include and things like that. So until then, I wish you well-informed, consent-filled births.
These episodes are edited and produced by Kaylee Harrod, as I'm sure you can probably tell. And our amazing music is credited in the show notes as well. So we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And in the meantime, have wonderful and consent-filled births.